going on my end. So, what was your reaction personally when you saw NDSU was going to FBS?
Yeah, well, I call local high school basketball games, and so I was just getting back to Brookings from a game on the road, and I pulled into the radio station's parking lot and checked my phone because notifications had been popping up throughout the whole night from like X notifications and stuff like that, and I looked at it, I was just like, wow, they decided this random Friday night that they're just going to do it, and it was time, and I guess it made sense from the NDSU perspective, and I still think it does make sense in total, both for the Mountain West and NDSU. But it just kind of took me by surprise, as I think it did a lot of people, even in Fargo. Honestly, a lot of people, from what I've seen, were just kind of surprised that that was the time, and they decided it's time to do it, and it was the best time for them, and I still think it's the best time.
Yeah, we were shocked here personally. I think we got it. It was 8 o'clock at night that came out, and none of us up here had an inkling. Like nobody from the forum, nobody from WDAY, nobody here at Spectrum, nobody knew this was coming. So they kept this pretty in-house on our end. What's the mood been like in Brookings on campus since this move came up? Because we saw that local news reel that the students seem pretty PO'd about it. But I mean, how do you feel? How does campus feel about it overall?
Yeah, I think the group that we have here working for Collegian Media, which is the newspaper, radio station, TV, all combined into one, we've kind of had a beat on it all, and so we're not necessarily surprised that it's happening. And I think the biggest thing that most people gravitate towards is that one game that's on the schedule each year, and that's the Dakota Marker. And we lose that game now, and it's going to be an interesting kind of hole in our schedule because every year you're looking forward to, well, when is that NDSU game? Are we going to Fargo? Are they coming to Brookings and stuff like that? So that's kind of the immediate reaction. On the other end, I haven't heard too much negativity. Of course, there's always that kind of playful rivalry, like, oh, of course they would go ahead and leave us in the dust and that type of stuff. But I don't think for the folks that are in this every day and talk about it and know the athletic department, and especially not the people inside the athletic department, they don't necessarily feel that way. Obviously, it's going to suck not having that Dakota Marker game and that rivalry. And now we're going to have to turn back to USD and be like, hey, we need you guys to kind of build this rivalry with you that we had with North Dakota State and that we're going to lose. But I haven't necessarily felt a lot of negativity from the students that I've talked to, especially not the group that I'm around for most of the day. But it definitely a little bit of a shock factor, and in some ways still doesn't entirely feel real. And it probably won't feel real until the new schedule gets released and we see, well, they're not on there, and
Yeah.
we're going to have to figure out what to do.
Yeah, is because the Bison are obviously the chief rival in FCS right now. Does that shift to South Dakota? Do you get a rivalry going with UND? Because I don't consider South Dakota State and North Dakota real rivals, at least not in my mind. So is South Dakota the true rival now? Like they are the team we got to beat?
Yeah, from my perspective, UND is kind of what I would consider a regional rival. They're not necessarily a rivalry based on skill or competition necessarily, because as far as I can remember, it's a tough place to play in Grand Forks for sure.
Hmm.
But when they come to Brookings, it's not all that entirely uncommon to see a multiple score game come out of it. There has been a rivalry with USD in every sport for as long as these two institutions have played each other, and that goes back all the way to the early 1900s. And they actually did used to have a trophy called the Little Brown Jug. There's been a couple of journalists that have tried to do some digging on that trophy and see where it is. There's rumors that old John Stiglmeyer has it hidden in his office somewhere in the Alumni Foundation
Go
building.
check Ann Arbor. They got a Little Brown Jug. I can go steal theirs.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But yeah, I think that's where you turn because you already have the corporate manufactured rivalry of the interstate series with USD and SDSU. I think that's where you turn, and whether or not it's going to become another trophy rivalry or if it's just going to be for bragging rights for the state of South Dakota, which does matter a
Yeah.
lot, as you guys have seen with NDSU and UND. It that's where you turn, in my
Yeah.
opinion, rather than UND or any other of these closer schools.
Yeah, when you play the Yotes moving forward in football, please do that. You guys wear blue, they wear red. Just do that every year. That was perfect what you did this past year. How disappointing is it that the marker rivalry is off? That you won't see the Bison on the schedule again?
Yeah, it is disappointing for personal level for me because I'm actually from North Dakota. I grew up 30 minutes away from the North Dakota-South Dakota border, right south of Bismarck. And so the Dakota marker, just in and of itself being, well, that's what they use to mark the state line in between the two states.
Mhm.
That was a really cool thing for me personally because it's like, yeah, I grew up 30 minutes away. If I really wanted to, I could go out there and probably find one of the actual markers out there. So that's going to suck on a personal note. But yeah, I mean, the rivalry was huge. I mean, these past couple of years, it being on national TV and the conversation on social media going up to the game is College game day coming to Fargo or Brookings for this game, and it turned out they didn't, but it was still like the possibility that they could come and put it on a national pedestal once again, like they have at other points throughout the last few years. But it's definitely going to be a hole in the schedule, as I mentioned before. I mean,
Yeah.
usually everybody, you're ramping up, it's later in the year, you're in the middle of the conference schedule, and more often than not, it's for first place in the Missouri Valley Football Conference.
So
And
you're
a
you're
lot
a
of that's
traitor, is
just
that
going
what
to
you're
be
telling
missing.
me? You're a traitor, you
Yeah,
moved North Dakota to South Dakota.
yep. But yeah, it's definitely going to be a hole. I know people from Fargo and North Dakota definitely liked making the trip down here to try and take up as many spaces in Dana J as they could. It's definitely unfortunate. I hope the game between NDSU and SDSU doesn't go away. Maybe in a few years they could match up once again. But for now, I think the rivalry and the trophy part of it is definitely going to take a back seat, and I'm not sure if that'll ever really come back if
Yeah,
it goes away for too long.
it'll take again, this all comes down to South Dakota State and the athletic department and when they want to make the move. So I'll just ask the question straight up. What's SDSU's opinion on going to FBS? If the Bison are there, Justin Sell maybe on the next flight to Las Vegas to try to get into the Mountain West. What's the Jackrabbit opinion on this on the FBS side?
Yeah, so far it seems like they're pretty happy being where they are. They're not quite sure what's going to happen. Nobody's sure what's going to happen. I mean, is the Power Four going to split off and do its own thing and then be left with a group of six? And if that does happen, is the group of six going to invite the top tier of the FCS automatically and let them in at a cheaper price? But of course, you start thinking about the money. Is it just going to keep getting more and more expensive? We just saw Sacramento State try to make their move to the FBS and get a scheduling agreement with the MAC where they basically have to pay for those teams to come out to California, and they don't get any money from the conference, and they have to pay nearly $20 million.
23 and a half million. That was the number.
Yeah, I mean,
That's too much. Sorry,
that's
just too much.
insane money.
Yeah.
And I just don't know if SDSU right now can handle that amount of money to be able to make the move up. And maybe if it's the Mountain West, SDSU and Sacramento State are obviously two different programs and two different teams. The Mountain West might think that South Dakota State is more of an attractive piece to add to the roster. But we've heard Gloria Nevarez say that NDSU was the only target that they were going in this round of realignment. And so those conversations directly with the commissioner of the Mountain West and South Dakota State probably haven't happened at this point. Knowing Justin Sell and him being the good athletic director that he is, and he's built up these programs, of course, the women's basketball team, the constant success that they have, the men's basketball with their run over the last few years, he's always having those conversations, and he's always talking to boosters and sponsors and trying to gauge interest, being like, hey, what do you think of this? Would you put money towards a move to the Mountain West? But at this current moment, I don't think it's in the cards for this year for sure. That's 100%. But the next few years, I think they're all right kind of sitting back, waiting for things to settle a little bit more to try and look ahead to the future to see what's going to happen. But right now, I think we're staying put in the FCS. And then the other object of that it kind of shifts the mentality surrounding South Dakota State football, because now they're in the position North Dakota State was always in. You need to win. You need to make it to the national championship every year. Otherwise, that season is going to feel like a loss. And that's a lot of pressure to put on Dan Jackson and his squad. And that's the position that they're in now that the Bison are out of the MVFC and the FCS.
Yeah, I'll just ask it this way on this question here. Does NDSU need to be tied at the hip of NDSU, so to speak, in order to feel relevant at FCS? Because the Kings are gone. So because that Bison Jack game was the game in FCS. There was a brawl a while, and that game meant a ton in the Big Sky. But this was the game everybody wanted to watch in the FCS every year. So do the Jacks need the Bison to feel relevant, or I think they're still very relevant in their own right, but do they feel relevant still without the Bison being around and at the FCS level?
Yeah, and I think that's a great question to ask, and I think that's something that we're going to find out here in the next coming years. And that goes back to, you need to win. You need to make it deep into the playoffs, if not to the national championship. When the two schools made the jump to Division I altogether, they were tied at the hip. They made it together and they decided, we're going to do this thing. We're going to go Division I and we're going to make this rivalry that turned into the game of the year in the FCS. And now that's gone. And now South Dakota State has built a platform for itself. They've won the 2 championships. They finally got over the hump and were able to do that. So now, like you mentioned, the question is, can they stay relevant in the FCS and can they win games? And I think if they can do that, they will be a hot candidate to be pulled up into the FBS eventually, whether that is the Mountain West or some other conference. I don't foresee the Conference USA or Sun Belt being an attractive option for South Dakota State at this point or even in the near future. But I think that is the question. Can SDSU be relevant in the FCS without North Dakota State to have that rivalry game with them?
How does NDSU's moving up affect the Valley, you think? Because the Bison are gone. That gives Youngstown a shot. That gives South Dakota and UND's going to be really good this year. How does this affect the Valley with the Bison not being there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you mentioned the teams there, Youngstown State, UND. I mean, USD was good last year, and SDSU kind of hit that losing streak towards the back end of the season. It really could open it up a lot because let's say SDSU goes on that losing streak in the later part of the year. Well, that opens up the conference if NDSU is not there. Then it's UND, USD, Youngstown State, the teams that you mentioned right there. So I think that's going to put a lot more emphasis on the games that SDSU plays with those other teams. Of course, we mentioned UND not necessarily being a rival, but a regional opponent. There's some added stakes to that, and then you add the fact that it might be playing for seeding inside the conference, and that can play into it as well. Youngstown State is not necessarily a pushover opponent by any means, and so you go out to Youngstown and drop a game that could have big Missouri Valley Football Conference implications coming down the stretch. So exactly to your point, there's other teams there, and I think it opens up the conference a lot because usually it's just, well, who can beat NDSU? Now it comes down to who can beat who in order to position themselves in the best way possible coming down the stretch.
You see the Valley adding anybody to take NDSU's spot? Or who
See,
would that be if there is any? If there are any teams.
Yeah, that's always a conversation that I see on social media. People around here talking about Minnesota State Mankato as a possibility. They've had a lot of success. Maybe? St. Thomas, potentially, if they decide to go to scholarship football. I also see a lot of people talking about University of Nebraska Omaha and how if they had a football team still, they would be in this conversation, and maybe they wouldn't have to add anybody. Maybe the Missouri Valley Football Conference would be sitting in a pretty good place. But I think we can take this conversation to a bigger scale and talk about the Summit League as a whole, because now the MVFC and the Summit League have that football agreement where Commissioner Josh Fenton is now a part of the Missouri Valley Football Conference as an advisor, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens. I mean, just in the last couple of years, we've had Western Illinois leave the Summit League, and then we've heard reports from Mike McFeely of the Forum in Fargo saying, well, Western Illinois and Lindenwood out of Missouri turned down the Summit League. It's an interesting thing, and a lot of people seem to think the Summit League is unstable right now, and that's kind of an interesting way to look at it. And the Summit League and Missouri Valley have a lot of teams in common, and it's an interesting conversation to have. I even hear some people saying, "Well, why don't you add Northern Colorado, try to make it the old North Central Conference type of feel?" It'll be interesting to see where they go with that, if they decide to add anybody, bring somebody up from D2 or non-scholarship football, or maybe even in a few years if the Summit League is still a league.
Yeah, it's interesting to see with the Summit League because again, I think because they're the four Dakota schools, and I've called it a double-edged sword in terms of that Summit League because you have the Dakota schools. That's great. They're four big name universities. I mean, I don't want to say they're huge names by any means, but they're big universities that people would recognize because of, the football team or the hockey program or women's basketball, those kind of schools. But then you have ORU, Denver's leaving the league already. Omaha, these are St. Thomas. These are schools that other leagues would look after, especially St. Thomas. We know they have a lingering eye to say, hey, the Big East looks pretty good. There are these other teams out there, other leagues that would look at NDSU or these other schools. So again, it's in the Mountain West contract. I haven't had a chance to look at it, but I've seen from Dom and Jeff and Mike that it's written in the contract. The Bison, if the Summit League, if they want to leave the Summit League, they can apply for the Mountain West for full membership. They wouldn't automatically get accepted, but they're eligible to, like same with UC Davis. I think those two teams don't have the same agreement in that regard. Do you think this heightens the rivalry between the two schools in other sports now that they can't play each other in football?
I think it probably adds a little bit of juice. It's like, oh, we won't see them in football, but the premier event now is going to be that game between them and volleyball. And then you turn to the basketball season. And I mean, we're recording this on Wednesday, so tonight is the SDSU NDSU game. And there's going to be a lot of people that come out for that. It's going to be a big event for sure. So I think a lot of attention does turn to that because it's like, well, yeah, we're used to playing this school every year in football, but of course with all the other sports. And then a sport that often gets forgot about, wrestling. These two schools still have a big rivalry in wrestling with that bell that they wrestle for. And so I think the attention does turn to the other sports if we're talking about NDSU and SDSU because usually both teams are competitive in the respective leagues that they are in, and it will affect the standings coming down the stretch on any sport that they play.
Yeah, we like to have a segment on our show with our hot takes. So let's just project here. You and I are in our 30s, right? We're both 30. We're in our careers. 10 years down the road. Say it right now. Is SDSU FBS, and what league are they in?
I think they are FBS, and I would like to say the Mountain West. I'm a Wyoming Cowboys fan, family from Wyoming. I think it would be great for the league with them losing those teams off to the Pac-12 or whatever they're going to call that league. I know for sure it's not going to be Power 4, but that's another conversation to have. I think SDSU is in the Mountain West. Whether or not the Dakota marker is still a thing at that point, you've seen it with the Nickel Trophy with NDSU and UND. That went away because it was just a stretch of too many years that they didn't play for it. So I think that SDSU is in the FBS in about 10 to 15 years, and I think it's got to be the Mountain West because the other regional rivals would be the MAC or the Big Ten, and the Big Ten is out of reach. So
yeah, I think the Bison will take better care of the Dakota marker than UND treated the nickel. The nickel was in their basement for a lot of years. They didn't care about the nickel as much. The Bison will care. They'll take good care of the marker for however long that we have it. I'll just ask, you got a favorite memory of the marker game? I have one. I bet you guys do on your end.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the question about the favorite memory with the marker game versus the NDSU SDSU series, obviously a game between them that the marker didn't count for this, but the national championship game that the Jacks ended up winning. That was an awesome memory. I was there covering it, and it was a really fun experience to be able to be there and finally see them get over the hump and against an opponent that they had trouble beating throughout the entire time and still have, obviously, now that the marker is going to stay in Fargo however long it will. But for the marker game, I do have to say last year was fun. Last year was fun, regardless of the score. It was the question of whether or not Chase Mason was going to play. And the hype surrounding it and the social media stars from Snaps Back Sports being there and taking it all in. It was a big buzz on campus that whole entire week leading up to it, and a night game on national TV, and it was really fun atmosphere to be around, regardless of the score. And obviously, that'll be a lasting memory that we have as the last one as FCS versus FCS.
It was fun until the ball was kicked off, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I would
Absolutely.
say on my end, I have a couple. I mean, trying to think now, the 2019 game will probably go down in the lore of FCS lore, not just the Dakota Marker when game day was there. And then, Adam Backus chasing, or Logan Backus chasing Adam Cofield's shoe tops down the sideline. That was always a fun one. And then I would go back 2 years ago in 24. Those two games they played in 24, the Bison won them both. But I think the 13-9 game, that's the last sellout the Dome has had. And boy, it was rocking that night inside the Fargo Dome. There's a 93-yard drive there was to win the game. And then the semifinal again, that one had probably even more juice because it was a semi. It was inside the Dome, another sellout. I mean, those are the kind of games that I hope we have in FBS. That's why the Bison are going FBS, is to get more environments like South Dakota State provided. And I hope, because in FCS it was okay. If the Jacks are on the schedule, okay, well, that'll be a sellout. Or if UND is on the schedule, okay, we'll get a sellout. That's why they're going up, is to get more games like that. And it's not just once or twice a year. Give me an outlook. 2026 Jackrabbits. What do we think? Second year for Dan Jackson. What are the expectations?
Yeah, I think last year Dan Jackson kind of came into a situation where, of course, Rogers had just left, and they called him in. Dan Jackson was already hired at the University of New Mexico, another Mountain West team, and he decided to take the head coaching job at SDSU, and he kind of had to scramble to get a team put together, and then injuries bit him towards the end of the season, and that's a large part of that losing streak before they finally were able to somehow get one in Grand Forks to make it into the playoffs. That was a fantastic football game. But I think this year it'll be more Dan Jackson's team. It'll be the team that he wants. He went out and recruited some players, not only just from the high schools, but also out of the portal. And he'll have the team that he wants. They started off the year good last year, and I think they'll do the same again with their non-conference schedule. And we'll see how the Valley plays out. Again, without NDSU, those games have a little bit more stakes to them now, because it's not just who can beat NDSU. It's, can you win every game on the Missouri Valley Football Conference schedule? And that'll be the one who gets crowned the champion.
I'm looking at this. I think the Valley schedule isn't out yet, but I do see an FBS schedule. You got Northwestern on the schedule, so I'm assuming that's the game you're looking forward to most. You're not going to be playing at the new Ryan Fields. You'll be playing at that Lakeshore facility, unfortunately. But so I assume that's the non-conference game you're looking forward to. Is South Dakota now the game you're going to look forward to in the regular season now?
Yeah, I think so. It'll be interesting because we just saw Travis Johansson leave for the DC job at Rutgers.
Yep.
And so they're going to have a first-year head coach again, and we'll see how that looks with it. Of course, you mentioned UND, second year for their head coach, and they're going to be good again, and they're always good. And so that's also going to be a game that I kind of have circled. It's like, well, are they going to be able to beat the Fighting Hawks or not? And that'll be a large part of the question of whether or not they'll be able to get one of the higher seeds in the playoffs.